Good evening. I'm Tracy Strobel, Chief Executive Officer of Cuyahoga County Public Library, and I am thrilled to welcome all of you tonight to the Maltz Performing Arts Center, and a big welcome to those who are live streaming from home. Tonight, we open the 20th season of the William N. Skirball Writers Center Stage Series. We are still going strong after 2 decades, and we're excited to start another amazing season. Of course, none of this would be possible without our academic partner, Case Western Reserve University. We are so grateful for their continued support and for providing this beautiful venue for our series. Please join me in a big round of applause for Case. Thank you. I'll be keeping my remarks short this evening because we have a very special video to show you. Some of our longtime subscribers may remember that we started this series out as just a single event. Tonight, we are hosting our 102nd event. Let's take a brief look back at how we got started.
For 19 seasons, the William N. Skirball Writers Center Stage Series has brought some of the world's best storytellers to Greater Cleveland. As we begin our 20th season, let's take a brief look back at how we got here. In our first season, Writers Center Stage hosted a single event in the Ohio Theater at Playhouse Square, an evening with Nobel Prize-winning poet Seamus Heaney. The following year, the Cuyahoga County Public Library Foundation received a generous grant from the Skirball Foundation to expand the series and continue it in perpetuity.
Writers Center Stage presents this opportunity for the city to meet authors from a variety of backgrounds and perspectives and to learn about things that they maybe haven't known about before. I mean, that's the beauty of the library in general, and Writers Center Stage puts that into practice and into action. And as special events chair for the foundation board, it's been an absolute pleasure to see the behind the scenes of how all of this works. There is so much magic that takes place, bringing everyone together. It's yeoman's work to bring everybody involved into this and to feel that I'm playing a small role in all of that as well.
Over the years, Writers Center Stage has presented a diverse representation of the literary world, from Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award winners to up-and-coming novelists, celebrated poets, leading historians, award-winning journalists, scientists, cartoonists, satirists, literary legends.
We're honored to have hosted many of the world's greatest writers, from Nobel laureates to Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award winning authors. Our guests include authors who consistently reside atop the bestseller list and those who have counseled presidents. We have hosted cultural icons and rock and roll Hall of Famers. But most importantly, these are writers that entertain but also inspire us. They challenge the way we think and often the way we feel. And that's why Writers Center Stage is one of the premier lecture series in the country.
I came to the Frances Mays talk during 2004 and 5, and it was so great that from that point on, I kept on signing up and I gathered friends together, and they're still coming with me. To me, one of the interesting things is that you learn how people read and what they read for. And some people read for characters, some people only want mysteries, some people are into sci-fi. But I think it's one of the things that we learn in Writers Center Stage, that the diversity in who the writers are actually makes the talks much, much more interesting.
Writers Center Stage started out as an effort to foster Greater Cleveland's reading community and add to the region's cultural offerings. It has also become an important part of the Cuyahoga County Public Library Foundation's efforts to raise funds in support of critical library programs that address the greatest needs of our community.
Well, Writers Center Stage promotes the mission of the library by bringing authors to promote conversations about different ways of life, expanding their worlds, and providing a safe environment to have these conversations, to learn and connect. I think it's important for Cleveland to have an event like Writer Center Stage to promote those important conversations. And I think it's important for the Cuyahoga County Library to be seen as a leader in this arena. And through Writer Center Stage, these conversations can be promoted and in turn put a spotlight on the library, all that they provide in terms of services to the community.
Writer Center Stage has given us some amazing moments, both on stage and off stage. From pre-show meet and greet events to a cappella sing-alongs with a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, we all have our favorite moments.
But my very first Writer Center Stage event was back in the Playhouse Square days. A friend and I went and saw Ann Patchett. And I have loved Ann since Bel Canto came out. And so seeing her that evening, seeing her speak, taking time away as like a young mom with little kids was such a special experience and so memorable. At the end of the evening, there was a long signing line. My friend and I waited and waited, even though we knew we needed to get home. But we had a wonderful conversation with her. And I remember telling her, like, I'm gonna try not to go fangirl over you, but I just so adore you. And it's such a pleasure to have you here in Cleveland.
I have countless favorites, but if I had to pick just one, it would be Margaret Atwood. Her genius was palpable in the theater. She was warm and open and kind, but I was really blown away by how funny she was. And she signed my copy of The Handmaid's Tale, Love, Peggy. So I will always cherish that.
So I was personally most excited for Meacham because I just finished his book, but I'm totally looking forward to Ann Patchett. I've read almost all of her work. Our book group read Bel Canto years and years ago in State of Wonder. I think that is going to be an amazing talk.
Tonight marks the start of our 20th season, and it promises to be one of our best ever. Thank you for sharing this occasion with us and for your support of the series.
Thank you. I look forward to making wonderful new memories this season and well beyond. On behalf of the Library Foundation, I want to thank the Skirball Foundation, beverage distributors, Ulmer, all of our generous sponsors, and especially all of you for supporting this series. Thank you for 20 amazing seasons of Writer Center Stage. Now I have two quick housekeeping items to share before we move on. First, please silence your cell phones. And second, there will be a book signing in the PNC lobby to the right of the stage at the conclusion of our presentation. Now on to introductions. Patty Schlonsky is partner in charge of Ulmer & Byrne LLP's Cleveland office. She chairs the firm's employee benefits and tax practice groups. She has been named one of the top 50 female lawyers in Ohio and one of the top 25 female lawyers in Cleveland. Patty is also a past member of the Cuyahoga County Public Library Foundation and has served on the Cuyahoga County Public Library's Operating Board of Trustees for over 10 years. She's not only an incredible leader, but an absolutely voracious reader. She somehow finds the time to maintain a popular literary blog called From Briefs to Books. It's been featured in Super Lawyer magazine. If you're looking for reading ideas, I encourage you to check it out at FromBriefsToBooks.com. You simply will not find a more ardent supporter of public libraries and Ann Patchett than Patty. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome her to the stage. Please join me with a round of applause for Patty Schlonsky.
Thanks, Tracy. Very, very generous of you. I am delighted this evening to introduce you to Ann Patchett and Kevin Wilson. 10 years, 6 months, and 8 days ago, not that I'm counting, Ann Patchett visited us as part of the 2013 Writers Center Stage series, and I was fortunate enough to introduce her then. Not much has happened in the world since then, just a pandemic, an insurrection, a war or two, and an increasingly fraught political environment affecting, among other things, what people read. At the time Ann Patchett visited us, Her most recent fiction release was State of Wonder, and her collection of essays, This is the Story of a Happy Marriage, was on its way. Her bookstore, Parnassus, had been open for less than 18 months. Since then, Anne has released 3 novels, Commonwealth, The Dutch House, and Tom Lake, and another beautiful and thought-provoking set of essays in These Precious Days. Anne's writing is notable for her beautiful language, gripping stories, insights, and ability to place seemingly ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, always told with a hint of humor. In These Precious Days, a compilation of 23 essays, Anne explains in her introduction that she fears death the most when she's writing a novel, because she's afraid something will happen to her before she's done creating the world that she envisions. So during the pandemic, she wrote these essays, addressing what matters most in this precarious and precious life. The set of essays took me through a range of emotions: surprise, laughter, anger, understanding, and tears. It was written in typical Ann Patchett style, with dry humor and deceptively simple lightness that does not quite hide the depth of her subjects. Ann Patchett tells you the meaning of life without burdening you with the weight of her words. Followed up by Tom Lake, which she wrote on a treadmill. Tom Lake is a story of life's winding roads, disappointments, and ultimate joys. The novel's narrator, Laura, explains, and this is a quote from the book, "There is no explaining the simple truth about life. You will forget much of it. The painful things you were certain you'd never be able to let go, now you're not entirely sure when they happened. While the thrilling parts, the heart-stopping joys, and larger sorrows, and unbelievably, those things get knocked aside as well. Until one morning, you're picking cherries with your 3 grown daughters, and your husband goes by on the gator, and you are positive this is all you ever wanted in the world." Anne received the 2021 National Humanities Medal from the National Endowment for the Humanities. The National Humanities Medal honors individuals or groups whose work has deepened the nation's understanding of the humanities and broadened our citizens' engagement with history, literature, and other humanities subjects. According to the White House citation, in granting Anne this award, quote, "The endowment recognizes her for putting into words the beauty, pain, and complexity of human nature. With her best-selling novels and essays and her bookstore, readers from around the world see themselves in the pages of Ann Patchett's books that take people to places of the heart and feed the imagination of our nation." Anne is an outspoken critic of book banning and supporter of intellectual freedom and expansion, and we are thrilled to have Ann Patchett with us tonight after a 10-year break. Anne will be in conversation tonight with her good friend Kevin Wilson, and I am also delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Kevin. Kevin is the author of 2 story collections, 2018's Baby You're Gonna Be Mine and 2009's Tunneling to the Center of the Earth, for which he received an Alex Award from the American Library Association and the Shirley Jackson Award. Tunneling to the Center of the Earth prompted his friend and fellow Tennessean Ann Patchett to dub him a dazzling and important new writer. His 2011 novel, The Family Fang, explores the damage inflicted on children in an atmosphere that is intentionally confusing. The novel was adapted into a film starring Nicole Kidman and Jason Bateman. His best-selling 2019 novel, Nothing to See Here, was a Read with Jenna book club selection and a Best Book of the Year according to the New York Times, the Washington Post, People, Time, Entertainment Weekly, and more. The book is dedicated to Ann Patchett and to his literary agent. Library Journal declared his latest novel, Now Is Not the Time to Panic, his most emotionally nuanced and profoundly empathetic novel yet. In a review in The Atlantic, Stephanie Hayes describes Now Is Not the Time to Panic as a novel that will make you laugh and then punch you in the gut. All of us who have read Kevin Wilson's novels and stories know that that description is spot on. Kevin lives in Suwanee, Tennessee, where he's an associate professor in the English department at the University of the South. We are all excited to hear what Kevin and Ann have to say to us tonight, so help me welcome them to the stage.
go. How are you? How are you?
Not great. More people and brighter than when we practiced.
They came in slowly, one at a time.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just going to say the nicest, easiest thing in the whole world is to be on stage with a friend. Because so often we're on stage by ourselves.
Or our enemies.
Or our
Yeah.
That's true. We could make
It's
a list.
rough.
Yeah, that's
It's so
really
bad.
hard. Yeah, but not our enemies, but then you're on stage with somebody who's going to do a really, really bad job in the conversation. Then you don't really know it until the first 5 minutes. And that's not going to happen because we've known each other for a really long time. And we flew up here today on the same plane. So that's where the really great conversation was, sadly. If you had a seat on the Southwest flight, the nonstop Southwest flight from Nashville, boy, would that have been a riveting conversation for you to listen to.
I wrote down what we talked about. And
on the plane?
Yeah, it says number 1, reading, number 2, writing. I was like, this is gold. We got it. We're good. We don't have to work anything else out.
Yeah.
I even wrote film 3 ? Because I thought if we ran out of stuff to talk about.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to tell you our origin story really quickly of why it is, where we started in order to get to this stage today. And was it 2001? Or
It was
it must have been.
It was.
Or maybe it was 2002.
It was like the very beginning of 2002, I believe.
Although it was Easter weekend. It was Holy Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was Holy Saturday of 2002. And Bel Canto had come out in May of 2001. And I, who have spent most of my life living in Nashville, had never been asked to read at Vanderbilt. And they asked me to read at Vanderbilt on Holy Saturday when, FYI, all the kids are at home for Easter. And there were 5 people reading. And I think that there were maybe 15 people in the audience. It was absolutely the worst event I have ever participated in my life.
It was rough to watch. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the lunch was the lunch before or after?
It was before.
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, from my end, Anne's talking about her terrible start to that meeting, but, like, I had been living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'd had a nervous breakdown, and my parents had to come and get me, and I was living with my parents, and a friend of mine who taught at Vanderbilt said, hey, this writer that you love, Ann Patchett, is reading. No one's going to be there. No, but they were like, yeah. Ann Patchett, this writer that you absolutely love, is going to be there. Would you like to come and see her read? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I got very little at all that is keeping me, like, wanting to keep going. So this will be good. And she said, also, if you want, you can have lunch with the authors. And I was like, okay. And we just happened before the reading. They sat us next to each other.
Well, it wasn't really that. It was that I got my lunch and went and sat at a table, and you were the only person who came over and sat with me. I mean, it was low. And you were really nice. And you told me you'd had a nervous breakdown and that you had moved home. And
it was what I led with that whole year. But yeah.
And home was an hour and a half away.
Yeah.
So you'd driven in. And so I was so grateful to you for talking to me. And then how did I have your phone number? That's what I don't know.
Oh my God. Okay. I don't think we've ever talked. I really don't think we've ever talked about this part.
And let me tell you, you told part of this story at a Parnassus event, and I had never heard it before, but it's really worth telling.
So yeah, okay.
But we have not talked about it. Yeah.
I had been working in a junior studies program at Harvard, and that was I was like, but I had to come back because I had that thing. And then you
Which
said,
we've already covered.
And you said, oh, I was a Radcliffe fellow right next to where you worked. And then we talked about Cambridge.
That's right.
And then we talked about your work and stuff. And I said, I'm writing. I'm trying to figure out how to be a writer. And
Wait, let's stop and say how old we were, because I think that figures in. How old were you?
23.
23, and I must have been 37.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
And so then, a good time was had by all. Anne did great.
Except me.
No, you had a great reading. You were awesome. But then I went back home to my parents, and I'm dead asleep. It's like 10 o'clock. And my mom wakes me up.
In the morning,
Yeah.
by the way.
And my mom is like...
Not at night.
My mom wakes me up, and she's like, Aunt Patchett is on the phone for you. And I was like, okay. And you say, this is Ann Patchett. And I said, oh, hey. And you said, I got your number from your friend who teaches at Vanderbilt, Leah. Right. I said, okay. And then it hit me. I was like, Ann Patchett is about to ask me to go on a date with her.
I did not know this until like a year ago.
Yeah.
Because I never would have been able to face you.
I was like, okay, all right. Crazier things have happened. Let's see. And you said, I just want you to know. Oh, no, because then I said, oh, hey, Ann, you just won the Penn Faulkner Award. And you said, I know, I'm calling every single person I've ever met to let them know. And I said, oh, how droll. You know, like, I think we're going to get along just fine. And then you said, well, I'm calling because I have to go back out on book tour, and I would love it if you would live in my house and take care of my dog, Rose. And I said, this makes so much more sense. Like, this, I was like, yes, of course. And it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And I came over, I met you and met Rose, who was this most beautiful, wondrous dog. And Anne would go away.
And you were one of the very few people she never tried to bite.
She did not try to bite my face.
She loved you as much as she loved me.
Yeah, tried to bite my dad's face.
So bad.
But but you would go on book tour, and you had just these incredible bookcases filled with books, and I was like, what would you recommend? And you would be like, this one, and this one. It was like Henry Green, John Updike.
Yeah.
And then I would just all day long read and sit with Rose. And then Anne would come back and she's like, did you read them? I was like, I did. And then we talked about the books. And then you'd go away and I'd read more books. And I think the loveliest thing was how much I had admired Anne's work. And I just loved her writing so much. But it was those moments of hearing somebody talk to you about the books that they love and why. It was an education beyond anything I'd ever received. It was just the greatest thing, and from that, we became friends.
And we really would have these periods of overlap, you know, for an hour or two. And one of the things that I always remember, this is so funny, that you said to me, you would read my New Yorkers, and then you would come back and you'd be like, where's that old New Yorker? And then one day with horror, you're like, oh my God, she throws them away.
That's right. I forgot all about that.
And then, because book tour just went on and on and on for that book. I went everywhere. And then, just like, you met Leanne.
I met my wife.
And so then I would come home and it would be Kevin and Leanne on the couch. And also I remember... this isn't going to be the entire talk, but I mean, we have
reading and writing.
We've got two important points, but it's really dear. My stepdaughter, who is a little older than you, met you and also met the guy that she wound up marrying the same week. And that she said to me, I can't decide if I want to go out with Giles or Kevin. And I was like... No, you are not dating my dog sitter. We are not going down that road. And so she married Giles, and you married Leanne, and that also, people ask me all the time, like, you must have been such a big influence in Kevin's work. And I never helped you. I never did anything for your work. I never got you an agent. I've never read anything you've written in a draft. I have never read anything you've written until it's published. But I went out with you to pick out an engagement ring for your wife. I went out with you to buy your wedding suit. And I was the best man at your wedding.
Yeah.
But, I mean, think about it. What are the chances that you would go to a reading and meet somebody who was 23 years old who grew up to become Kevin Wilson? It's just astonishing that we have been together all this time from that.
It was all part of my master plan to get to Cleveland. To get here, I was like, if I can play this off just right and thread the needle,
someday
I'll be up here with Anne. But no, it's and Anne talks about, I don't know it, but we can start with reading.
Okay, that's good.
I will say, like, people ask, like, who are your influences and stuff, and one of the ones I immediately run to is Anne, because I was reading Anne, obviously, before I met her, and one of the things I loved in Taft, Patron Saint of Liars, Magician's Assistant, like those early books, when I was first really, like, trying to figure out how to be a writer, one of the things I knew I wanted to write about was, like, the thing I'm interested in is, like, how do you somehow form a family even when you're not biologically a family? Like, how does a group of disparate people come together to take care of each other, to make the world, like, better when you're holding on to another person? And Anne's books, so many of those books, when you get to Bel Canto, I was like, oh, this is how you do it. You imbue all of these characters with dignity and humanity, and you show all the ways they could be broken, and then you show the ways in which they can, like, hold on in a way that, like, makes the book worthwhile. And I was like, oh, this is how you do it. And it was just like the map for me that no matter what I was going to do, I was like, you can take all these disparate pieces, but if you're intentional with it and you can build a story around it, you can figure out how to make it better.
You know, that's so interesting. And thank you, that's really kind. But something that I have not thought about before with you, people ask me all the time what my influences, my literary influences have been. And I always say, it's only the people that I read when I was young.
Yeah.
Because you get to a point that no matter how much you love a work, you're almost never actually influenced by it. Whereas when you're young, what you read, you're influenced by almost de facto. It doesn't make any difference. And so the people that I was influenced by were the people that my parents were reading when I was in high school and college, and it was Updike, Bellow, and Roth, because it was the 70s, and that's what everybody read, and those were the books that were in my house. But I was, like, you read me when you were young enough that I could actually be part of that for you.
Yeah, this was before I had considered being a writer. I was reading your work, and I honestly do think most of my influences were read before I decided that writing was the thing I wanted to do. It was when I was still so firmly invested in just how incredible it is to read a book, And I think because I was reading only for that, just the pure pleasure of, like, what the story can do for me, that I think it just seeped in that way of, like, this is how I can, like, once I started to write, I was like, well, what do I know? These books I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a real piece of our relationship now that when we get together, and we don't have a lot of time together, because you have a big job and you've got 2 kids, and I feel like your life is it's much busier than my life.
And
I don't know why. I do feel that. I do feel that way. The fact that you're responsible for other humans, that seems very time-consuming to me. But when you come to Nashville, and we'll get an hour and a half, and we will, like, you just barely get in the front door, and we sit down on the floor, and we talk about what we're reading, just as fast as we can go. And then you look at your watch, and you're like, okay, I've got to go. And then you leave. And we have the same lecture agent, and so I go out on book tour, and I don't do this kind of thing so much anymore, and I'm in the middle of book tour. And so I said to my lecture agent after the end of the pandemic, I think I'm done. I think I'm not going to go out on the circuit anymore. And he was like, yeah, I understand. I respect that. That's great. And then a month goes by, and he was like, oh, I just got an offer for you to do this event with Kevin Wilson. I mean, would you go to Cleveland? I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? To go on a trip with you where we would be on a plane together and we could just talk about books as much as we wanted? I was like, absolutely. I was so excited to do this. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, he calls again. He was like, gosh, coincidentally, I got another offer for you and Kevin Wilson to do an event in Michigan next spring. And I called Kevin. I was like, is this the point of our friendship, where people pay us to be friends on stage together?
Well, it depends on how well this goes, I think. Because word will get around really fast.
One way or the other.
They're
One way or the other.
It's not good. They mostly talked about dogs and reading.
Okay, talk about reading.
I do want to, we hadn't really kind of planned. I just wrote reading. I'm realizing now.
I don't think there's a whole lot more.
But one of the things I just want to kind of think about for you is, you can talk about Tom Lake. I almost said Tom's Lake because I kept joking that I was going to call it Tom's Lake the whole time. But Tom Lake, in thinking about that, though, I know it's like we just said, like, at this stage in our careers, you're not really reading books to be influenced by them, like stylistically or anything. But when you think of this novel that you wrote, are there books that you believe in some way that they like harken back to or echo? Are you, when you write a book, do you have books in mind?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is our town.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and our town is the piece of American literature that I go back to again and again throughout my life. Since I read it for the first time, probably when I was 14, I've probably read it every year. Do you have a book like that you just always go back to again and again? The fact that it's a play and it only takes an hour and a half to read is really helpful.
I don't, in that I feel like I'm so behind on everything that I want to read that it's rare for me to read a book more than once.
Yeah,
it has
me
to be
too.
really meaningful, and I don't know that I have one necessarily.
And this really is it for me. And part of it is because I love the play. I love the simplicity of the language. And whenever I think about trying to do something that's grand, it's really helpful for me to go back to our town and just say, this is it. This is life. Life is made up of these small moments, and you either appreciate them or you don't. So both in terms of writing and the language, but also in terms of my life. If things are getting too complicated, I just feel like it whacks me back into my lane. So definitely our town, but also, this book is kind of made on a triangle of literature. So it's Chekhov, and it's Thornton Wilder. And people talk about that. People are really interested in Thornton Wilder. People are really interested in Chekhov. And then the third point of the triangle is Sam Shepard, which nobody is interested in Sam Shepard. And I don't know why that is. Because I was in college in the 80s, and it was Sam Shepard was everything. He was sort of the universal crush. He was the actor crush, but also the writer literary crush, and he was brilliant and thoughtful and quiet and moody. I mean, probably a little Duke-like. I don't know, that's pushing it. But yeah, so to have those three influences in the book, but then also, because I own a bookstore, all I want to do is recommend books. All I ever want to do are talk about other people's books. And I kind of can't imagine writing something in which there weren't recommendations embedded in the text. Mm-hmm. So it makes me really happy when people say, I read your book and then I went back and I'd read Our Town, or I went on YouTube and I watched Spalding Gray or Paul Newman in Our Town. And I think, all right, that's good, because I'm pushing people out of the text, and that matters to me a lot.
Yeah, I was telling you that I had never read Our Town. I had no idea what it was about. I mean, I knew it was about a town, obviously,
That was
but like
ours.
I had gotten that far, but and it was just such a wonderful stroke of luck that before you sent me the book to read, my son, who is 15 now, but when he was 13, was in our town at his school, and he was the undertaker. It was a very small part, and I was like, all right, here we go. Let's see what this thing's all about. And I was like, why in the world are teenagers doing this play?
Yeah.
This is, one, wildly depressing, and two, no way any of these kids understand any of this. You know, and I was just like, the way that it hit me at the end of this story, I was like, I just can't even know if I can explain to Griff why it is hitting me in the way that it's hitting me.
But how did it hit Griff? I mean, how did he understand the play?
He mostly just was really interested in the undertaker aspect of it. To him, it was a play about an undertaker who was really having to help people along with it. But no, I mean, to him, I think what he thought of it as is just like, because we live in a really small rural town.
Yeah, you do.
What he was interested in is this is the story of the kind of cyclical nature of what it means to both live and die in the place, and how you can be shaped by that, and how you can feel the echoes of it. Because my son goes to see movies in the theater that I saw movies when I was his age. And so to him, that's what he's thinking about with our town, is how I am watching my son while I'm watching myself watch a movie in the place where I grew up.
Which is just so our town.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
So-
the ultimate our town.
So that's
yeah.
how I think he and I kind of bonded over that, was the rurality and the central of place.
Yeah.
Not so much about like aging or family or anything like that. But it was just so wild, because then you were like, I've written this novel that's about our town. And I was like, I know what that is. You know, I've got it locked in. And then when I read it, it was so incredible to watch the ways, you know, you utilized it through the text. Yeah.
So when I'm starting a book, when I have just the tiniest little idea for a book, then there are books that I think, oh, I wonder if part of what I need to know is in that book or in that book. And that's when I will go back and reread things. There's things that I read so long ago, which is something I'm doing now, you know, for an idea that may or may not come to something. But I'm like, oh, I really want to read. Like, I just read Alice in Wonderland. And in fact, I didn't read it. I listened to Jim Dale read it.
Oh, well, Jim Dale's going to be, yeah.
And it was spectacular. But do you have that? So if you have an idea for a book, do you think I need to read these things before I go there?
What a great question, Ann.
Thanks, Kevin.
No.
It's really just your question thrown back at you.
Well, I did have it right there. I mean, there's two answers to that. Like, one is I sometimes will read technically, where I'm like, I want to write a very short novel with a compressed timeline where the characters don't leave, right?
Right.
And so then I'm like, okay, what are some books I know that did that I loved? And then reading them again, thinking only about the technical aspect of it, is really fun for me. And I love reading those books. And actually, when I'm reading for the technical aspects, you can't help but read for pure pleasure, and I find something new about the book that I really love. And so, like, for Nothing to See Here, I was reading really short, compressed novels and trying to figure out how I could, like, use that shortness to work for me. That if I could make everything super tight and not a lot of time pass, I could get combustion, which is what I needed.
Literally.
Yeah, I knew. I mean, that was it. I was like, how am I gonna make? How you make fire? You summer, compression, a lot of tension, and you're gonna get it. But I always have, like, almost every book that I write, I have one book that is the book that guides it, and no one would know, I don't think. But for me, it's the guiding thing, and I hide little things in it. So for me, Nothing to See Here about these fire children, these kids that burst into flames, and a nanny that has to take care of them. It's really just We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Of what does it mean to be held within this space separate from the townspeople and the villagers. There's also this kind of secret of, like, what have you done? Like, is this something inside of you that's made you, like, bad? And do we need to remove ourselves from the world? And what happens if we keep hiding away? And I was like, I'm just going to write that, but in the way that I'm capable of writing it. And Now Is Not the Time to Panic, which is my most recent novel, is just Member of the Wedding. the girl and member of the wedding's name is Frankie.
Frankie, sure.
And I was just like, I want to write, over the course of a summer in a small southern town, a young woman's life is changed by this kind of singular event. And you feel the echoes of it forever, for as long as you live, and you're bound and constrained by that space. And I was like, I'll just write member of the wedding, and we'll see where it goes. And I know that I can't write. I'm not Carson McCullers. I'm not Shirley Jackson. So I'm going to write the book that it will be unrecognizable to anyone that would even consider that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Miley Malloy and I went to Australia together on book tour 12 years ago, and we decided that we were both going to write a novel based on High Wind in Jamaica.
Yes.
And so hers was a book called Nothing to See Here, and mine was Commonwealth.
Wait, Nothing to See Here?
Not nothing.
Oh, sorry. I was just about to call my lawyer.
Yeah, right? Do not become alarmed.
Do not become alarmed.
Which
yeah,
is
yeah.
really close to Nothing to See Here meets Now's Not the Time to Panic.
These inscrutable titles that
Do
don't
not
mean
become
anything.
alarmed. It's just a bunch of words on a piece of paper, and it was like the most fun exercise, because the two books that we wrote could not have been more different. You would never, ever read either of those books and think High Wind in Jamaica. If you haven't read High Wind in Jamaica, and it's about a group of children who are being sent, English children who are being sent after a hurricane from Jamaica alone back to London, and their ship is taken over by pirates. And basically these kids just bring the pirates to their knees. They destroy them. And I was telling that story once to Donna Tartt, and she said, oh, well, yeah, that was the little friend. Yeah,
That's so wild.
I also based that on High Wind in Jamaica. So if you're trying to write a novel and you just don't know which way to turn, read High Wind in Jamaica.
High Wind in Jamaica.
But one thing that's really interesting to me that you were saying, you read for basically the form, like technically how it's done, whereas I read for the plot, for the story. So if I'm reading Alice in Wonderland, and I read Alice in Wonderland, and the other book that I read was The Wizard of Oz, which I'd never read. Have you read The Wizard of Oz?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, it's amazing. It's really, really a good, weird book. And it's fascinating to see through the lens of the film, because the parts that they left out, the parts of the book that aren't in the movie, you're like, wow, that was a good decision. That was really great. But when you think about it, Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz are the same book. Like little girl starts in peaceful place, goes through the curtain, makes a full circle, and then comes back to the same place. Changed but unchanged. So I'm much more looking for the plot and the story than I am technically. But I will say, also when I wrote Commonwealth, I went back and reread Old Filth by Jane Gardam, which is one of my favorite all-time books. Anybody in here? Anybody? Raise your hand if you've read Old Filth. Just a couple of you.
Most people are not going to raise their hand,
No,
Anne, for a book called Old Phil.
So filth stands for Failed in London, Try Hong Kong. And it's about a man who grew up in Singapore and then comes back to London. But the book has an incredible structure and a lot of little chapters that go back and forward in time. And I actually made just a chart of like, okay, on page 63, we are now in 1949, Filth is 9 years old, and just seeing how it went back and forth, who's got the point of view, which characters are introduced at what point. What a pleasure that is.
Yeah.
What a great way to read.
Did you read Peter Pan?
I did read Peter Pan.
Do you think like Peter Pan fits into that too? Like, there's a girl, Wendy,
Yes,
and she
absolutely.
goes and she comes back to this thing and is changed but not changed.
Right. And boy, oh boy, Peter Pan, which is a book that does a lot of politically incorrect things. We can't quite judge Peter Pan by the standards of today. But Peter Pan is a story about Wendy, which I never knew that before. I read it during the pandemic for the first time, and just every mistake that every woman makes, Wendy made that mistake first for us. You know, that she's going to mother this guy and take care of him and, sew his shadow back on. It's appalling. It's appalling what those boys do to Wendy because they just force this little girl to be their mother, and then she never gets over it.
I think you told me you were reading it, and so I said, hey, Griff, let's read Peter Pan. And he was like 10, and I was like, this is an incredibly disturbing book.
Oh,
and Griff, too. There's a line in it where it's like for the lost boys to fit them through their little parts of the tree. It says, he would take one of the lost boys and do something to them, and then they fit. And Griff goes, what is happening? What is going on? And I was like, I better call Ann. Like, I am not sure. But yeah, I mean, it's a wildly insane book.
Yeah. Talk about reading to your kids, because I love that.
Yeah, so reading for me is, in so many ways, like the thing that saved me. It's if I had to give up one, I think we talk about this. Like, if I don't know why anyone would make me choose, but
between first thing on the list
and reading, and film, if you wanted to throw it in there. If I had to,
we're not going to get there.
But if I would get rid of writing, I would read. I mean, it still is the thing that gives me the most pleasure in my life, and I think it's the thing that, when I go into it, when I come back out into the world, it's the thing that is most stabilizing. It makes me realize how I can live in the world still. And so my kids, I'm trying to figure out, I don't want to lose those moments with them, and I love reading. And so my wife and I have this thing that we started since they were little. My boys now are 15 and 11. But since they were little, Leanne reads a book to Griff at night. And while she's doing that, I read a book to Patch. And then the next night, Griff and I read the book that we are reading, a separate book. And then Leanne reads a separate book to Patch. So there are always 4 books in play, and we just alternate. We go back and forth. And so every night, one of us is reading to our kids. And it's like the most wondrous thing. And sometimes I read books to Griff. I'm like, this is true grit. I love this. Let's read this. We read We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and Griff loved it. But sometimes we read books that he chooses, like Ringworld by Larry Niven, like this weird, huge sci-fi novel. It kind of doesn't matter what we read. We read Catcher in the Rye, and Patch and I read stuff, and Origami Yoda, all these great, like, young chapter books where, and I read them to Griff, and they're beautiful. I wish I had books like that when I was a kid, and they make me cry. And Griff was like, when Dad reads you Origami Yoda, he's gonna cry at this point. And I'm like, I don't know how it would happen again. And then I'm just like weeping as I read it. And they have no idea why, and it's hard to explain. But really and truly, it doesn't matter what we read. There's something about, like, you're sitting in bed next to this child, and the two of you are reading this book, and you're saying the words out loud, and I know that Griff or Patch is like assembling those words into an image in his mind, and it's different than the image in my mind, but it's the same. And so we are both together and yet making a world inside of our own head, and then we drift off to sleep. And it's like, there really and truly is like nothing better than that in the whole world. That is the only time I'm happy, like truly happy. The problem, though, now is that Griff's 15 and Patch is 11, and I've gotten, like, we're reading these Animorphs books to Patch, and he's like, I'm kind of over these. And I was like, there are 55 of these, and we're reading them. Like, I love these. And so he's like, okay, I guess I'll read these with you. And I can see him sometimes, like, rolling over as I'm reading. I'm like, he's turning into a hawk. You don't, whatever. But we are now at the point where I'm like, I want to read Henry Huggins and the Paper Route. It's got Ramona in it. I love it. And Patch is like, I just don't. I'm not reading this. And so then my wife is like, when the kids are asleep, she's like, are you reading Henry Huggins and the Paper Route by yourself? And I was like, yeah, this is like where we are. it's either this or have a third child. And Leanne was like, have fun with Henry Huggins and the paper. Yeah.
So what happens when Griff says no?
I don't think he will, because he knows I'll be weeping in the tub, and but there will be a time, and it's fine. Like, things will change. And there are some nights where Griff is like, I just want to read my book, because he has a book. And he's like, I'm really getting into this part. And he reads by himself, So that will happen, and that's fine. Like, the worst thing I could possibly do is try to, like, hold on to this longer than it needs to be held on to, right? I don't want my children to be like, he was reading to us when we were 20, and I want them to think of it in a nice way. But
can I just stop? I remember when Griff was born, and you would chew his fingernails?
Yeah.
Because you just couldn't bear to put the clippers on them?
That's not a weird thing. I mean, that's a thing.
But you said I could just picture him coming home from graduate school and being like, Dad.
The choices that we make shape the people that we love, and so it's going to be the nails and the books,
right.
And that will be fine. But again, like, I guess another question is, like, because of the kids, I've been thinking about books that I love from when I was a kid, but I wanted to ask you, especially since you have a bookstore, and I know, like, man, when we take the kids to Parnassus, or really, like, one of the things is when we travel, we try to find the independent bookstore wherever it is, and it's like the kids know they can buy whatever they want. Like, we will buy anything, any book, and it's really wondrous to watch them, like, find the thing. They're like, this is what I want. But are there books that you remember, like, fondly from your childhood, or that you think of as the bookstore, like, as kids come in to look at books to read?
It's so strange, because my childhood just didn't include books. I remember reading Charlotte's Web, which I was obsessed with, and the Little House on the Prairie books. But I feel like children's literature was a later invention. They're just, YA especially, didn't exist when I was a kid. There was The Witch of Blackbird Pond and Go Ask Alice. I think those were the only two that were out there. So basically I just went straight from the Little House books to Updike, to the rabbit novels. And one of the great joys of owning a bookstore is reading children's literature for the first time in my life, and I didn't do it for such a long time. But because the authors come through, and children's book authors, I wonder if you know this, are better than grown-up authors. They're just nicer, better.
You've told me.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're just better people. And the illustrators too. I mean, I always say it's like firemen. Like firemen are they're just better. And so I really started reading children's books because I so liked the people who were coming into the store as children's authors. They were just spectacular people. And that's been a great addition, and that's how I met Kate DiCamillo and became obsessed with her and read all of her books. Do you guys read all of those? Yeah.
They're wonderful.
So spectacular. And Tom Lake is dedicated to Kate, and Kate's new book, The Puppets of Spellhorst, is dedicated to me, which was a complete accident.
It was an accident?
It was an accident, yeah. I mean, we just sort of crossed. It was like an O. Henry story where we both managed to pull it off. But I feel like all I read, and I don't feel this way because it is just a fact, all I read are books that haven't been published. And maybe once or twice a year, I manage to read some backlist. When I started out on book tour, I decided that I was only going to read backlist on book tour as my gift to myself. And I read The Custom of the Country by Edith Wharton, which was so fantastic. And then I was like, oh, okay, now I have to go back to reading galleys because it's time to get back to work at the bookstore. And I am the person who reads. That's my job at the bookstore. I don't work there. I'm there a lot, but I don't work there. I've never been on the schedule. I don't know how to run the cash register. I don't know how to order books. I used to know how to run the cash register, and it was a disaster. Because if Ann Patchett gets behind the cash register, it's like, the entire store lines up and they want to buy things from you, and it's not good. So we have a first editions club. And what that is, I like to say, is Fruit of the Month Club that doesn't rot. And so we pick every month a different book, and we get the author to sign it, and then we mail them out. But somebody has to pick those books, and that's my job. And so I am forever reading 4 or 5 months out. So right now I'm reading, I've got a January book and a March book. I'm reading a second March book because I love these 2 March books. So one of them will go to April, but February is still a gaping hole.
Man.
And it's like you're on the hamster wheel. And it's also like arranging seating at a wedding. So you don't want to have 2 debut authors next to each other. And you don't want to have, 2 books set in the 1700s next to each other. And you don't want to have if you've got one dystopian novel a year, that's really as much as you can take. And so I'm always thinking, oh yeah, this is really good. For example, probably my favorite book that I've read this year is coming out in November. This also makes me a really poor person to talk about books, because I'm like, I really want you to read this book, which you cannot buy. Alice McDermott's Absolution. And it's amazing. And it's set in the beginning of the Vietnam War. It's set in Saigon in 1962. And in the same way that The Night Watchman was something else entirely for Louise Erdrich, and Demon Copperhead was something else entirely for Barbara Kingsolver, I've read all of Alice McDermott's books, and I've loved them, and this is something else entirely. And I was so thrilled when I picked this book for first editions. And then somebody at the store said to me the other day, I'm one of the employees, that she had read the new Kristen Hanna book that's coming out in the spring, and that it's set in Vietnam. And I was like, I don't care. I am never going to read that book. Because
snooze, you lose.
Yeah, right?
You gotta get
really, if you wanted to have a Vietnam book, you were going to have to get ahead of Alice McDermott, not behind her. And there's no way in the world I would pick 2. This is what I've come to. This is now how I think.
Well, and I think sometimes I'll get books to blurb in advance, and it's fun to read them. I'm usually like curious about, it's an author I'm kind of interested in, but it's just a strange sensation to read a book that you can't really talk about with anyone. You can't engage with it in the way that like makes reading so meaningful. And often I read the book on audiobook when it comes out just to refresh my memory and be able to talk about it. But I think this is like the essential change in our reading styles, right? Like, because when we first met, you were like, you got to read Henry Green and you got to read this stuff in the past. And I was like, I will never be able to make up for the lack of what I haven't read,
But that's life.
And I've never read
none
like
of us
any
will
of the
make
Russian novelists. So I was like, what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to read everything that will ever come out from here on out. I'll just read every book that ever comes out, and I'll be on top of things. And we would talk like that. I was like, I've read this one. You were like, I am not going to read that book. And so I was just constantly shooting forward, and you were like, these are these books that are really helpful for us. And then the switch happened when you were reading forward, and then I was like, I blurred books, and I am kind of feeling like stuck in this moment. So I want to read books that were like written 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And so now I'm reading, everything I read is old, stuff that I've just not read before. And so when we talk, it's that weird moment where you're like, I've read this book that you're not going to get to read for a few months. And I've read this book that came out 20 years ago. And it's like, well, bye. We'll see you next time we see each other.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating, and I fantasize, someday I'll get rid of the bookstore and I'll be able to read Henry James again. I'll go back to being the kind of reader that I was. But also, I have been so hugely expanded by the reading that I do. And a great example, when I think about books that have influenced me or writers that have influenced me, Hanif Abdurraqib. I mean, hey, give it up for Hanif Abdurraqib. There's a writer. I mean, would I have, if I was just reading Henry James, would I have found him? But I feel like he's taught me how to write. Like when I read his books, I think I didn't know that you could do this in a book. And not because he's being clever, but because he is being so profoundly himself and open-hearted to the universe. And I'm like, oh, this is teaching me something. Mm-hmm. So that experience is it's really worth it.
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree. But I think for me, too, like reading books from like 20 or like reading the Laurie Colwin novels that we were talking about, or reading these, like, I'm really into like reading all these novellas by female Canadian novelists, like from the 80s. And say like one is about a woman who's a curator at a museum who goes to this island. It's called Bear, and she falls in love with the bear. It's like a beautiful, just incredibly beautiful book. So bizarre and strange. And I think one of the things that's helpful when I read into the past, like when I read Colwin, who's just like these wry, beautiful, like slice of life stories, is I'm like, oh, all this stuff that I thought was new that I've been reading in the contemporary world, somebody did it 20 years ago.
Right.
And that's helpful for me to realize, like, oh, no, like this bear novel is weirder than anything Ottessa Moshfegh has written. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't mean that as a slight. It's just, it's reassuring to know, like, these things exist, and you look for them and you find them, and it's lovely. It's a little scary to understand how it can disappear and then come back, but that's also really helpful for me to just be like, oh, I think I can find stuff that I need kind of anywhere if I'm looking, deliberately.
I want to say something about Laurie Colwin. So one thing that I try really hard not to do, because I have done it in the past and it's always come back to bite me, is I try not to lie about what I have read. Do you lie?
Yeah, constantly.
Yeah. It's so hard because, you run into another writer and you're like, I love that book that you just published. And, then I haven't read it.
Mine is more like, because I'm in academia and they're like, Shakespeare. And I'm like, sure. Anything. They're like, Milton. And I'm like, I do. How could you not know Milton? So mine is more like that.
Okay, that's it's a very different thing.
Yeah.
I'm like lying to people that I'm talking to. But Laurie Colwin is a writer that is the favorite writer of so many of my favorite people, and I have been lying about having read her forever. I mean, forever. I had never read her. And then I was talking to you recently, and you said it wasn't Family Happiness, it was Happy All the Time.
Happy All the Time.
Happy All the Time. That you were reading Happy All the Time, and you said, have you read her? And I was like, this is the moment I change. I was like, no, I have not read her, and I'm going to. And what's been so fantastic about that is that the books are so small that I can like fit one in between my obligations, and it really is like a palate cleanser. I just feel like, oh, I'm gonna relax now because I've read a Laurie Colwin novel.
They're wondrous. I just could not love them more when I found them. And it's just that joy, too, when you find a writer you didn't know about and you're like, this person has 6 books. Do you know what I mean? Immediately, like, oh, my year is set. It's just the loveliest feeling when like, I love this one and I love this one. And there's 4 more,
Yeah.
And you're not waiting on them to write more. You just know they're here whenever I'm ready.
Will you go straight, like if you get on a kick, will you read them all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just try to read them all.
Did you read the Patrick Melrose novels?
I did. I didn't actually. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was brilliant.
No.
Did you?
You gave them like all of them to
Yeah.
Leanne, and she read them, and I was like, I feel like I've read them now.
Sure.
Because Leanne had.
Did she like them?
She loved them, yeah.
But those are books. I think there are 5 of them, and they're super short. And I love them. And okay. Has anybody read the Patrick Melrose novels of Edward St. Alban? Yes. I mean, it's really like sticking your hand on the burner of the stove. It's It's hard. It's harsh. And I loved those books. But I would have died if I tried to read them one at a time. Like if I had read them with a 2-year gap, because they're so short and they just end practically in the middle of a sentence.
Yeah.
But reading them all together, just turning in one volume, turning the next page and going was a very fulfilling experience.
Do you see me looking at this light that says 10?
But
We have 10% of our allotted time left.
to talk about writing.
Or film. I feel like...
I really have a question.
Oh, okay.
Can I have a question
Okay.
about writing?
And then we'll see if I can answer it or if I'm going to pivot to a different question.
Okay, so you go away to write.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that.
So-
No, it's just amazing to me. Like you actually will go rent a hotel room or something, then go to write.
Yeah, because I have the kids and my job are such that like my children, it's just very hard for me to write because they're like, let's go shoot baskets or watch an old movie, and I'm like, I gotta write the great American novel, and I just will never choose writing over. And I don't mean that like in a like, it's very hard to because they don't care about the writing. And so for me, like what I need is to isolate myself for 10 days. And because of the way my brain works, I just repeat everything over and over forever in my brain. So all year long, I'm just thinking about the book. And then I get those 10 days and I just go and I write as fast as you can write. And I can get pages. And it's just a kind of manic stage where I'm just like, you've been running this through your head for so long. I go to a cabin. I wrote Nothing to See Here, pretty much in 10 days in a cabin in North Carolina. I was like, I wake up, get my computer, I write in bed. I would write, and I'd realize it had gotten dark because I had never turned lights on. It was dark. I'd go to bed, and I'd wake up, and after 4 days, I called my wife. I was like, I think I'm going to finish this book. And that's just how I work right now. I'd prefer not to, and when the kids get older, I'd love to write in a different way. But what about you? So how do you write?
Well,
because this is the most incredible thing.
So I wrote Tom Lake on a treadmill.
Yes.
I wrote the entire book on a treadmill desk while walking. And I'd had this treadmill desk for a long time, and I used it to answer emails, and I never thought about writing. And then when I was ready to start this book, I was like, what the heck, I'm going to try this. And I wrote the whole book, and it was amazing. It was for a lot of reasons. One, turns out there are studies that say people are more creative when they're walking, and it doesn't matter if you're walking on a treadmill or through the woods. And also, I felt like I was stepping into my work every day. And I didn't get distracted. The part of my brain that says, what are we going to have for dinner? I've got to flip the laundry. I've got to return these 10 emails. That's the same part of your brain that's going left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And so I had the best concentration I've ever had. Also, I get sleepy when I get stuck. Sleepy is sort of my default. I don't, get hungry or whatever. You don't get sleepy when you're walking. You don't fall asleep on a treadmill. And it was great. Oh, also, I had all sorts of pain. Like at the end of writing a novel, I was always like this. In fact, I really busted you about that.
Mm-hmm. You did.
Did you change?
I came to your house and you said, get on this treadmill and put on these headphones and I'm going to play movie soundtrack, orchestral music.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, what is this? And you're like, this is how you write your novel now. And I was like, oh, I don't think I could do this.
But you wrote in bed.
I write in bed like this, and sometimes on the floor. And so I write on my knees. And I told you that I'd been having some shoulder pain, and you were like, there's this treadmill, this is how you do it. And I said, I just don't think I can do that. And just the loveliest thing about our relationship and stuff is you said, that's perfectly fine. but just get used to a life of pain. And I was like, oh, Anne.
Well, but you could write in a chair sitting up. I mean, there's a lot of space between a treadmill and a lying in bed writing. It doesn't work.
That's where the magic is. It's the crayon. I have to be, but yes, I'll try the treadmill for the next book.
Well, it doesn't have to be a treadmill. I just really worry about, that you're going to spend the rest of your life like this. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, never mind. I want to say two things before the last light on this box flicks out.
And then this turns red. It
Yeah,
says
I know.
time's
It
up.
really feels like a bomb.
They warned us. They were like, do you want this? You don't have to have this. And we were like, we want it.
But I don't know. Anyway, okay. So I wanted to say about Now Is Not the Time to Panic. What a hugely important book it is for me, because I feel like I've never read anything that explains what it's like to make a piece of art and put it out in the world and have everybody else own it and everybody else talk about what it really means. And I wonder sometimes if people who haven't made art would really understand. Oh, the yellow light's blinking now.
It's warning.
It's warning us to shut up. Okay, but I don't even think this is a question. I just really love that book, and it was so, so important to me.
Before we get to time's up, I was just going to say, I think so much of my writing is in response to Anne's work, and it's meaningful to me, but also you sent me Tom Lake, and you were like, here's the next book, and I read it in a day, maybe 2 days, but I remember, and I called you, and I was like, and I just said it in a funny way just a few minutes ago, but when I read this book, I was like, I cannot think of a novel that more perfectly encapsulates what I would genuinely really call the great American novel. It was just the most wondrous book I had read in forever. I'd never read anything like it, and the beauty of it is like the culmination in so many ways of all the things that I love about your books. And I just was like, I can't imagine that it's possible to write a book this beautiful. And it's just the greatest thing about that nervous breakdown where my parents had to come get me. My parents are still iffy on whether this is a good or bad thing, was that I met you and it gave me insight into how you could be a writer and make things and be a good person. And it's always been the model for my life in both of those ways. So thank you so much.
This is the end where we get all weepy. And I can't take any credit for anything in your life, but your friendship is so central to me and so important. And there is this enormous sense of relief when we're together, sitting on the floor in my den, or actually this has really worked, sitting on this stage having this conversation. This is the same conversation that we would be having at home. But what an enormous comfort it is, because I think that for both of us, the things that are most important in life are the same.
Yeah.
And the farther I go along in life, the more I really do just want to read. And when you say, like, no one's going to come and knock on our door and say, Sophie's choice, is it going to be reading or writing? And we're going to be like, okay, I'm going to keep reading, which is a no-brainer. That's absolutely what I would choose. But I don't know anybody else who would make that choice but the two of us, and that it's really comforting. And I also want to say, of all your books, and I don't, you can't pick your favorite, but boy, read Baby, You're Gonna Be Mine. That book is so phenomenal. Just the stories. And talk about the whole thing, because we're not on red blink yet. We're still on yellow blink.
Oh my God, Anne, you're giving me a panic attack.
I know,
like the light is like
It's
so bright. No, okay. What now?
Talk about the fact that the novels have female narrators and the stories have male narrators.
It's just something that I figured out is like my novels are girls This is not very insightful. The stories are boys. Whenever I write, all my novels are female main characters. It's where I'm most comfortable. Those books are like how I feel like I can write those longer works. I can be inside that voice. It's super comfortable for me. And in the compression of a short story, with that tightness, and it's like this is a small burst of something, they're always about boys, and it's something about like, okay, this is something that I can pull from inside of myself in a different way and make it compress. And it's just like the weirdest thing
It's
over the
weirdest
course
thing.
of a career, I'm like, novels, I feel like I should get paid like $5,000 to do a master class, and I'm just like, novels are girls, short stories are boys, and we're done. But that's just the way my work functions, and so that's been a way for me. But not even that, just to be like, these are these two things that I love. There's how they're distinct for me specifically. And so when I go into them, I'm getting something different when I make them. And yet they still make me happy. Yeah.
That's just amazing. So what next? Stories or a novel?
A novel is True Grit. It's just, and I hide everything in the book. So this, like, Fire Children were in Family Fang, then I wrote about them. The line from Now Is Not the Time to Panic was in another book, and I wrote it. And Now Is Not the Time to Panic, the main character writes a failed novel about a girl who goes to pick up all her half-siblings to go beat up their father who's left them all. And I was like, ooh, I'll do that. So it's just Maddie Ross going west for a reckoning. And I'll see where I go. I'm going to move. Yeah, we'll see.
Where are you going? Straight to the top.
To California. What about you?
You know what I say when people say, what are you writing? I'm writing my name. I'm writing my name in your book, Ann Patchett, over and over and over and over again. And I am so good at it. You would not believe how talented I have become at writing my own name. And that's it. I go back to hotel rooms and I read, and I get on a plane and I read. And they want us to leave now. It's over. Blinky, do we have anything meaningful to say to wrap this up?
I don't know how we can pull it. I don't know how we can pull it back now.
I know we had this incredibly sentimental, beautiful moment.
And then I said novels are girls and short stories are boys. And
then the lights started.
And then
to
you
play.
were like, we can't end on that. And you were like, what else are you writing? And then you covered this up. I'm just so grateful to be able to do this with you, Ann, and I'm grateful to be able to talk to everyone.
It's been really fantastic. And actually, I think this is even better than the plane.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.